When I walked into my therapist's office for the first time, I was 27 years old, and I had just recently somehow miraculously survived a suicide attempt. And she looked at me and she said, "How can I help? What's the problem?" And I said, "I'm afraid I'm transsexual." She said, "Is that a bad thing?" And I said, "Yeah, it is. You lose your family, you lose your friends, you lose your job, you lose your credibility. It costs a small fortune, and you're most likely to die young and violently. There's no upside." And she said, "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" I said, "Fix it. If I broke my arm, I go to the hospital and they take care of it. I don't want this." And she said, "That's not the way this works." And the reality for transgender people today is that you are 2.5 times more likely to be unemployed if you do not have a college degree. You're 4 times more likely to be unemployed or underemployed if you do have a college degree or a graduate degree. You're 30% more likely to be sexually assaulted than a non-transgender woman. You are 3 times more likely to live in poverty, and you are 150% more likely to experience homelessness. And if you are a trans woman of color, all those numbers are significantly higher. But that's not the painting or the picture that the conservative politicians, commentators, and podcasters like to paint. Tucker Carlson and Vice President J.D. Vance say that being transgender, that people will claim to be transgender to gain access to institutional power in elite universities. Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens say that people claim to be transgender as a shield against any kind of criticism. And podcaster Joe Rogan says that adults are talking children into being transgender. And the list goes on and on and on. So what does it mean to be transgender? Well, the term transgender has evolved to be an umbrella term that covers a wide variety of sexual identities, gender identities, and gender expressions. You have trans females, which are people that were born male and have transitioned to female. You have trans males, people who were born female and have transitioned to male. You also have gender fluid, non-binary, gender-free, agender, trigender. There's dozens of expressions, individual identities. Drag queens are not transgender. What they do is performance art. It's not an identity. And I myself am a post-operative male to female transsexual. Now, while I don't identify as transgender, nevertheless, I am under the trans umbrella. Now, all the uniqueness here, all these different identities are very important within our community. But to the people at large, the people in power that are attacking us, these are distinctions without a difference. But they're not really attacking all transgender people. They're really attacking trans females, people like me who were born male and have somehow transitioned to female. And why do I say that? Because in the last presidential election, the nearly $300 million of anti-trans ads all featured only trans females. The bathroom bills, the so-called bathroom bills that restrict use of a public bathroom to one's birth sex, is continually touted as, quote, keeping men out of women's spaces. And all of the legislation arguments about transgender people in sports, they all say the same thing, keeping men out of women's sports, even when the people that are playing the sport are as young as 6 years old. But if you really want to instill fear and create hatred toward a specific group, you have to keep the public's attention focused on 3 key elements: a pervasive danger, a righteous shield, and innocent victims. We look at a pervasive danger. When the polling firm YouGov asked, if you had to guess, if you had to estimate, what percentage of American adults do you believe are transgender? The average result was 21%. Yeah, 21. The actual number is 0.8, less than 1%. So how can it be that people have such a crazy difference between what's reality and what they see? Because in the 1 month prior to the 2024 election, the number of stories on Fox News that ran about trans female athletes increased by 700%. Throw in a couple high-profile celebrities that are talking about the fact that they are transgender, like Laverne Cox and Dylan Mulvaney. Add a couple of high-profile athletes like Fallon Fox and Leah Thomas, and take the All-American Olympian off the Wheaties box, and they come out as Caitlyn, and all of a sudden it can seem that transgender people are everywhere you look. And let's not forget that the number of transgender characters on TV has increased from essentially 0 to a high of 42. They're everywhere. But the reality is, even though 42 characters may sound like a lot, that is still 0.08% of the total 5,625 characters on primetime TV. And when we talk about athletics, of the 8.5 million athletes competing in junior high, high school, and college, 0.008% are transgender. It's not there. Point number 2, a biblical defense. It's not me, it's the Bible. It's against biblical teachings to be transgender. When I came out at 29, my parents asked me to go and talk to their minister. Now, I was raised in a Southern fundamentalist religion known as the Church of Christ. And if, ooh. Yeah, someone is familiar. And if you're not familiar, we always say that the Church of Christ is a lot like Southern Baptist, just not as liberal. And even though I hadn't attended that church in a number of years, the minister and I had known each other since I was 13. He scheduled 30 minutes for us to have a conversation. And as I walked in and I sat down, the first thing he said to me is, "You know what you're doing is wrong in the eyes of God." And I disagreed completely, and I said, "No." And I said, "Let me ask you a question. When we die and go to heaven, what do we look like? Do we have the old, frail body we had at the time we died, or do we have the young, healthy body we had in our prime?" And he smiled and he said, "I think you misunderstand. The body dies and goes back to earth. Only the soul goes to heaven." And I said, "Exactly. And I'm not changing my soul, so what's the problem?" He was silent. And then he jumped to Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and he quoted, and I said, "Yes, that's true, but it also says that it is a sin to wear clothes of 2 different fabrics. It's a sin to have tattoos, and that remarriage after divorce is adultery, and adulterers are to be put to death. I never hear you preach about that. Show me where it's written that you get to choose which sins are punishable and which are not." Silence. And he said, "God intended for you to be a man." And I said, but a few years ago, Brother Johnson had a heart transplant. Now, God's plan was for him to die at 41, but rather than get up on a stage and preach against that as a sin, you praise God for giving us a surgeon that allowed it to extend his life. How is mine any different? And after 2 hours of back and forth, and after he admitted he had personal prejudices around gender and sexuality and race, his final words to me were, "I wish you hadn't come in here today." So if somebody tells you that it's the Bible that's against being transgender, ask them to quote book and chapter and verse and context, because I assure you, it just ain't there. Now, part 3 of this is the idea of innocent victims, that we are protecting women. The Journal of the American Medical Association says that between 2022 and 2024, 60,000 pregnancies resulting from rape occurred in the 14 states that do not have any exception in their anti-abortion laws. That means 60,000 women had to carry to term, give birth, and then raise the child of their rapist. And the Department of Justice says that 99% of all sexual assaults and rapes are perpetrated by non-transgender males. The number that are transgender is so significantly small, it's literally quoted as being significantly indifferent, which is 0.05% or less. And implicit in this idea that we're protecting women is that we somehow value women. But do we really? We've been telling young girls for decades, if you can dream it, you can be it. And now, yes, 60% of all undergraduate and graduate enrollees are female. But still, only 2% of venture capital money goes to female entrepreneurs to start their own business. 2%. And when you look at the Fortune 500 CEOs, only 11% are female. And that is an all-time high. And we talk about the other innocent victims, protecting children. The idea being that we are protecting children from making a mistake they are going to regret later in life. But data shows that the actual number of people who detransition back to their birth sex and birth gender is at most 2%, which is a far cry from the 33% of non-trans people who regret nose jobs, liposuctions, and boob jobs. And the people who do detransition, the number one reason they say they are doing so is because of social pressures, family rejection, and fear. They're still transgender. They're just too afraid to show it. So anti-trans laws are not going to protect children, but they are the ideal Trojan horse for attacking the entire LGBT community. And if I sound angry, it's because I am. Are you listening, marriage equality? Because you're next. And I believe that there is no stopping this. We see this all the time. These attacks are going to increase under this administration, this Republican-led Congress, and Republican-led states until we reach an inevitable end. Genocide starts somewhere. Now, when I say that, the common refrain I often hear is, come on, Gina, no one is calling for trans people to be rounded up and murdered. And I always say, yet. Genocide starts somewhere. The percentage of people living in Germany who were Jewish in 1933 when Hitler came to power, 1%. The percentage of people living in America in 1870 who were indigenous Americans, indigenous people, 1%. The percentage of people who are transgender in America today, 1%. All make perfect targets for vilification and dehumanization. They're small in number, they're highly visible, and they lack the resources to effectively fight back. Great targets. That is, unless that we, the people, stand up and say no. So where do we go from here? Yes, I'll take an applause on that one, absolutely. We have to form community. Reach out, both within our own community and without. And it starts with family, both birth family and chosen family. President Ronald Reagan, someone I'm sure is a hero to many people in this room, actually said, the person who agrees with you 80% of the time is a friend and an ally, not a 20% enemy. We have to stop looking for perfection. When you look at the recent No Kings March, the 5 million people that participated, there's a good chance we disagreed with 20% of their individual beliefs, but yet we happily stood shoulder to shoulder to them and they with us. Interesting thing is, by contrast, the people that attended the president's birthday parade, the number was much lower. Estimates were 10,000. I think the exact number was 8647. So while we can have our differences with other people, they can be real. They pale in comparison to those who are attacking us. And we have to continue to use our voices. Yes, continue to write your local and elected officials, express your views, continue to peacefully protest, and continue to vote. But take it down closer. What can we individually do as people? Share your stories. Share the stories of the trans people you know, the struggles they've faced. Reach out to people outside of your own community, to other communities who are under attack for simply being who they are. Immigrant community, refugees, Muslims, people of color, nonprofit organizations, civil liberty groups. And engage a person who is transgender. Be the person who sits next to him on the bus, sits next to him at a lunch counter somewhere. And don't be afraid to say something and start a conversation for fear of saying the wrong word. You know, lead with empathy, lead with honesty and curiosity, and your heart will shine through. And if we snap at you, I apologize, but please understand we're under a lot of pressure right now. And stand up for those that are not in the room. If you hear someone tell a joke or make a slur against trans people, say something. Something as simple as, you know, you don't need to understand a person's full identity to give them basic respect. That's all it takes. This is not the first time that our community has been under attack. Far from it. Homosexuality was listed as a mental disorder by the American Psychiatric Association until 1973. And it was illegal in many parts of this country until 2003. The World Health Organization has stated and called transgenderism a mental disorder until just 2019. And the last laws against transgenderism went off the books just 4 years ago in 2021. And San Francisco has always led the way. The Compton Cafeteria riot of 1966, just across town, gave rise to Stonewall. The Gay Inn in Golden Gate Park and over in Polk Village gave rise to the pride parades we all celebrate and participate in. We have risen up before, we have taken control, and we have expanded the rights of those for ourselves and for others, and we can do it again. When we stand together, when we stand in unity, we show them, those that wish to harm our fellow citizens, that our unity is stronger than their bigotry. We show them that we believe in the American anthem of E pluribus unum, out of many, one. So what do you say? You ready to make some change?